is there a parallel in everything that we did in the past versus, what science fiction is talking about?
Actually, there are a lot of parallels. If you start reading the scriptures with an open mind, you find a lot of stuff which is very familiar. So a lot of people feel, oh, these are just stories, they're not relevant to me. And when I was reading the scriptures, I realized that they are very relevant.
Why there are 84 lakh births that somebody has to go through that cycle to become a human being?
So the theory of 84 lakh births, 84 lakh yoni, I feel it somehow, resembles the number of species that exist on this planet.
Creation, the moment of creation, as per our ancient texts, Brahma, Shiva. I just want you to just get into that a little bit as to, what was that moment of creation and how did it happen?
The different scriptures, they tell us the story of creation as well. So Vedas tell it in a very cryptic way. And Purans give us the details. They elaborate. That's the nature of Purans. They elaborate on the stories that are just hinted at in the Vedas.
Where is the Patalok now? Are they still really on Earth or is this something else?
I think the mistake that people tell while narrating the story is that there's multiple universes and all the rings are landing up in a single Patalok. That cannot happen.
Right.
Because as we talked about the 14 Lokas, the lower Lokas, one of them is Patal.
Yeah.
So there's Atal, Vital, Sutal, Talatal, Mahatal and Patal and Rasatal. I think it's very arrogant of humanity to feel that we are the only ones.
Absolutely.
How is it possible? There's billions of galaxies in the universe.
Namaste and welcome to this episode of the Oddcast Show. Today we are going to be discussing ancient India and its myths, along with how they draw parallels to modern science. Whereas science fiction and modern science is talking about stuff that's happening in the future. Ancient India and its deeds talk about a lot of the stuff that's already happened, similar to what we are talking about in science fiction, which has already happened in the past. We have Dr. Vineet Aggarwal ji with us today. He is a Hindu scholar and apart from being a doctor, we've also read a lot of his blogs where he draws parallels between ancient India and its civilizational capabilities versus science fiction. Namaste Vineet ji, how are you doing?
Thank
Welcome
you so
to the
much.
show.
I'm good and thank you for having me here on the show.
Most welcome.
It's a pleasure.
It's the Oddcast Show, so we're talking about odd stuff and we loved your blog on the way you've drawn parallels between
Thank
our
you.
civilization and science fiction, and I want to just get straight in. We have so many questions. The first thing is that is there a parallel in everything that we did in the past versus, what science fiction is talking about? Futuristic stuff like, advanced weapons, tech from the future, flying saucers, aliens, all that is what we want to try and understand that, where have you got all these parallels from?
So, Kunalji, actually there are a lot of parallels. If you start reading the scriptures with an open mind, you find a lot of stuff which is very familiar. So that was the idea of my blog, in fact, because I was reading scriptures and I'm also a man of science. I've done my medicine and then I did my management sciences. So both are very scientific courses in the sense that, there's logic, there's analysis that you need to do, and there's some sort of understanding of the modern world, how
There's
it
a
runs.
rationale behind everything.
There's a rationale behind everything and it is practical,
Right.
And when we talk about these stories from the scriptures, a lot of people feel, oh, these are just stories, they're not relevant to me. And when I was reading the scriptures, I realized that they are very relevant. Why? Because of the principles that are hidden in the stories, the scientific theories that come from those scriptures, so-called stories, they actually hide a lot of details, a lot of scientific details. And as I said, you need to have an open mind to understand them, to see them, identify them, and to understand them, and to draw a parallel. So to answer your question, I wouldn't say that everything is covered already. Whatever modern science is discovering, everything is definitely not covered because technology is different, right? And we are exploring on some other parameters, and the ancient world probably had a different parameter of, for itself.
Or maybe we've not yet even reached that kind of tech that they have.
Perhaps. But, just taking a small example of fossil fuels.
Right.
A lot of people say, and in fact, I had that argument with another author in one of the panel discussions in Mumbai in one event, where he said, oh, you talk about the ancient society being so advanced, but they were riding chariots, so they didn't even have fossil fuels. And the immediate thought that came to my mind was that having fossil fuel is not the parameter for advancement. What are fossil fuels doing for us? They're actually, degrading the environment.
Absolutely.
They're ruining the environment. They're bringing up the, the greenhouse effect. They're causing global rise of temperatures.
Maybe they knew about it. That's why they chose chariots.
Perhaps. You never know. So that's why I said, the parameters were very different for the ancient society than what we have today. So everything cannot be found, or parallels cannot be drawn with everything. But having said that, there are definitely very strong connections that you find with a lot of modern scientific developments, like aircrafts, for example, the existence of different inhabited worlds. And, aliens, of course, scientifically, we haven't been able to communicate with aliens. But our scriptures mention a lot of these Lokas. In our scriptures, they're called Lokas.
Right.
So the Lokas, since they are harboring life that did not originate on Earth, by definition itself, they become aliens. Right? So you just look at it with a fresh set of eyes and you realize that there is a lot of information that's available. The entire galaxy is described in the scriptures, in the Purans, in Bhagavad Puran especially, there's the reference to our Milky Way, the galaxy, as a Shishumar, which is a dolphin, sort of a jumping dolphin. So it's like a curved shape, for whatever they could visualize with their naked eye. They didn't have telescopes, right? They didn't have Hubble Space Telescope and all to see everything around them. But whatever they could identify with their naked eye observations, or through their the meditation that they did, or their trance state, whatever revelations came to them, they called it Shishumar, and they've plotted the major lokas in that structure. So there was an understanding that there are worlds beyond Earth that have life, that are inhabited, and perhaps this life is more intelligent than us.
Right.
Because. And I think it's very arrogant of humanity to feel that we are the only ones.
Absolutely.
How is it possible? There's billions of galaxies in the universe. There's trillions of stars in a galaxy, and out of those trillions of stars, there would be at least 10% of stars, I would say, random probability that, that would have some
capability of sustaining life.
Right? So every star might have, like, say, 10 planets. If we have like 8 planets, 8 or 9, ninth is always very controversial in our solar system. But
Pluto.
but out of the 8 planets, at least one has life. So there's a very high probability that, other stars that have planets revolving around them also have capability to sustain life. So you find it very strange when you realize that, the scriptures that were written thousands of years ago, they recognize that probability and they probably built on it.
Right.
Even if it's stories, even if you consider them only as stories, they build on that premise that there is life on other planets, which are called Lokas.
Right.
Whereas in modern day, you find a lot of people scoffing at the idea of aliens being there.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is irrational.
Right.
It does. Just because currently there's no evidence does not mean that it does not exist.
I mean, a couple of 100 years ago, we thought the Earth is flat, right?
Yeah.
Everyone thought that.
Exactly. So I feel there is a lot that can be understood better in modern science, and probably it can also give direction to modern science,
Right.
As to which way it should look to find all these answers. Yeah.
Right. So you talked about the lokas. Now, typically, when I was growing up, I was always told that 3 lok hote hain. But I understand that, from reading your blogs and, watching you elsewhere on different settings and shows, you've talked about 14 lokas.
Right.
Now, can you just explain what is the structure of these 14 lokas?
Sure.
What's the hierarchy, etc.?
Sure, Konalji. So, teen lok jo hai, the three lokas, they are basically very broad divisions. So, there is the Madhya Lok, the middle world. If you quote Lord of the Rings terminology, so the middle world is Earth and Earth-like planets. So there is 7 dweeps, actually. There's 7 dweepas, and Jambu Dweep is one of them, which, according to me, I feel, a lot of people equate all these dweeps as different continents on our planet. I feel Jambu Dweep is what refers to Earth. And the other dweepas are different planets, which are similar to Earth. So this is the Madhya Lok, the Bhulok. And above this, the planets above this are the higher lokas, which is considered 1. And the lower lokas again are considered 1. So that is how the 3 lokas terminology comes up. But total, there are 14. So the higher lokas have 6. Then there's Earth, so total 7. And the lower lokas have 7 more.
Right.
So there's 14 lokas.
Right. So these lokas, the 14 lokas that you're describing, there are higher lokas, the Madhya Lok and the lower lokas. Now, is this like a heaven and hell kind of concept?
Kind of, yes. Very similar, but it is not exactly heaven and hell in the sense that, there's no eternal damnation. There's no, you're not always living in the, city of joy. It all depends on a very basic concept of Hinduism, which is called karma.
Right.
So karma is a very beautiful concept that actually puts all the responsibility on you. A lot of people, shrug away the responsibility. They say that, if God wants, this will happen, God willing. So of course, circumstances or God or destiny or fate has to support you in getting some things done. But karma is the theory that tells you that you are the one responsible for your life. Whether it is this life or whether it is the previous life where you performed certain actions or many, many, many lives that you have lived before. All that accumulated karma is deciding your fate. And then your present actions, you can counter that fate. You can try and counter it also with your present actions. That's also mentioned in the scriptures that your present actions are more powerful than the destiny that has come from your previous actions. And that's how the universe runs. So the cycle, runs automatically on this algorithm. So God does not interfere everywhere, and he does not really have that much time to sit and play with every person's destiny.
So the other realms aren't physical realms, right?
No, so that's what I'm coming to. So the theory of karma tells you that if you do good deeds, you actually land up in a higher or a more evolved form.
Okay.
And that more evolved form, we know on Earth, we are the highest. We are the pinnacle of evolution, right? What else is there beyond this? Humanity has not evolved further after, whatever thousands of years that we have been existing. There is no further evolution. Neither in terms of our, mental capabilities, not our spiritual abilities. And, so the yogis and the mystics of the ancient time, they delved deeper into their consciousness. And they realized that there are a lot of aspects that we don't understand. There's a lot of metaphysics, there's a lot of mental abilities also, the siddhis.
Yes.
If you've heard of Ashta Siddhi,
Absolutely.
So the siddhis are capabilities that you can develop through meditation. So they realize that there's a lot that can still happen. And probably basis that they realize that, from humanity upwards, also there is a ladder of evolution. And all these higher evolved beings are believed to live in the higher lokas. That is why they're called higher lokas, because they sustain a higher form of life. And this includes, the devas, gandharvas, yakshas, the rishis, the manasputras of Brahma. So these are the higher lokas. They are physical realms. They are not in a different dimension. They are existing in this very universe. They are very much a part of this physical reality. and they exist in our universe. It's just that they are on a different, probably a different galaxy or a different solar system. They're not in our immediate neighborhood. And similarly, when you devolve because of your bad karma, you reach a lower state, which could be on the planet itself as a plant or an animal or an insect or an amphibian or whatever. Or it could, if you've been really, really, really bad, so sort of the parallel of heaven and hell comes, where if you've been really bad, you're pushed down into the hell. So here, hell is a different entity altogether. Narak, there's 28 different types of naraks.
Oh,
Yeah, which are even below the lower lokas.
you mean the 14 lokas ke niche there's another
Yes.
set of 28?
Yes, which is the narak realm, the
Okay.
hellish realm. But that is separate. But based on what activities you've done, if you're more asuric in your, more demonic in your life, in your karma, it will lead you to the lower lokas, where you'll be born probably as a naga or a daitya or a rakshas or a asur. Asur is again an umbrella term. So as a negative being.
What exactly happens in those realms which is different from our current?
So those realms, actually, interestingly, the higher and the lower lokas, both of them are more, they're better in terms of the physical abilities. They are more ostentatious. They have more resources than the Madhya lokas. So the asuras are also very well-to-do. So they are not like paupers. They're not struggling to make two ends meet. They're living in luxury. So asura. So see, if you imagine what happens to a kid who's born in a very rich family, there are two ways the future can go. Right. One is he follows the paths laid down by dharma, society, religion, and he progresses further. In his own spiritual journey, taking his family to a higher level and bringing up the society along with him, to a higher level. Whereas the other most common thing that you see is, when the kids get spoiled.
Right.
When you have a lot of money, there's drugs, there's everything
Because
that
you've
goes
got
on.
access to so much, right?
Because you have access to so much and you don't have value for money.
Right.
You don't have value for that effort. So the difference between Swarg and, the Bill Swarg, it's called, because it is a miniature or an underground Swarg. Because it has all the opulence that is there in Swarg, but the tendency of people living there is demonic.
Yeah.
So those are the two things that can happen, right? So Madhya Lok, why it's called Madhya, it's in the center. It may not be in the center geographically in the universe, but it is Madhya Lok because here you have the opportunity to go either up or down.
You're given that opportunity.
You're given that opportunity.
Is this the toughest one?
This is a tough place to be in, yes. But if you realize how this universe works, the law of karma, you control what you're doing, you consciously put an effort to do good karma, then this is the best place to be, because then you can actually evolve further. But if you ignore all that and if you immediately jump into sense gratification and you're abusing the opportunities that you have, you'll end up in the lower lokas. So the only difference between higher and lower lokas is the tendency of the people living there.
That decides where they go.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
The one thing that I was always intrigued and, mystified me of late, since I'm reading a lot about, your blogs and, similar stuff, that science actually stops once death happens. They have nothing to say as to what happens to, the soul or the consciousness, etc., of that person who's passed away. Whereas our ancient scriptures talk a lot about that. They talk about rebirth. They talk about 84 lakh births before that. They talk about creation, where modern science has got other than the Big Bang theory, they've got no other theoretical basis as to say that why are we here, where do we come from, and where do we go. So I want to just get in, talk about creation in terms of, the laws of creation and how we were created based on our scriptures, and also about, why there are 84 lakh births that somebody has to go through that cycle to become a human being. So I want you to just talk a little bit about that.
Sure. So creation itself, is a very beautiful topic. And if you go to the scriptures, so there are different set of scriptures. First of all, a lot of Hindus don't understand why do we have so many scriptures. So the Vedas are meant for a different intellect. So people who are more intellectually oriented are supposed to read the Vedas. People who are more into stories, they're supposed to read the Purans. Itihas is again making the same philosophy available to the masses. So the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. Bhagavad Gita is a very, very simplified summary of the Upanishads, which are very difficult to grasp for an ordinary person. But Bhagavad Gita, you can still understand. So there's different scriptures that give out information which is needed to live in this world and to, actually live better in this world. And they give it for all sorts of, intellects. There's different categories that are available. So when we're talking about the theory of karma, the theory of rebirth, incarnation, this is also a theory to help you understand why things happen in life that you don't find a reason for. Why are certain children born with disability or defects? Why would a pious person suddenly meet with an accident? Or, something really bad happens to a very good person. In your present life, you can't find an answer to that. Why would that have happened? Why is someone born blind? What is the fault of that child? That his whole life, he or she has to deal with that disability, So the answer comes from the previous karma that you've done. So, and again, the theory of karma, it talks about 3 different types of karma. So there is the Sanchit karma. Sanchit is accumulated. The lives that you've lived previously, all that karma has accumulated is called Sanchit karma. When you're born in this present form, some part of that Sanchit karma is taken up for fruition. That this will be executed now. In this life, you'll have to face a certain part of that karma because everything you can't deal with in one single life. So that is called the prarabdha karma, which is already now taking shape, taking effect. And then you have the vartaman karma, which is your present karma. So your life is a mix.
It's a test.
It's a test. It's a mix of all that you've landed with in this life, in this form, and what you do with it. So the theory of 84 lakh births, 84 lakh yoni, I feel it somehow, resembles the number of species that exist on this planet. Because these yonis that we talk about, the forms that we take, they are different forms of life. It's not within human form that you have 84 lakh varieties. It's not that. It's the 84 lakh life forms that you pass through the cycle to come to the stage of evolution of a human. And it is said that the last birth that you take in 84 lakh, after the cycle of 84 lakh, is of a human. So I feel it basically tells us that, there's a whole evolution that has happened to bring you to a stage where you are the only species on this planet with the intellect to understand what is going around and with the will to do something about it.
With the free will.
The free will to do something about it and, to act on it. So if you actually see scientifically, if you just Google, how many species are there on this planet, it's very close to 84 lakh. There's about, scientists theorize that there's about 8.7 million species, which is 8.4 lakh, 8.4 million, 84 lakh is 8.4 million. So I feel it's an indication. Again, our Purans are very symbolic. The concepts that they give, they are full of hidden meaning. So I feel that they symbolize these stages of evolution that life has gone through to bring you to that stage where, you can look at yourself, have existential questions, and you can find answers to them also.
Also about creation, creation, the moment of creation as per our ancient texts, etc. I've read various texts and I found it so beautifully explained. And then I saw your podcast. And then I found that you have explained it even more beautifully. So, just, about Vishnu, Brahma, Shiva. I just want you to just get into that a little bit as to, what was that moment of creation and how did it happen? And
Right.
why do we recreate, destroy, create, destroy? Why does the cycle keep going on?
So to begin with, I think that's where we started and then I digressed. So the different scriptures, they tell us the story of creation as well. So Vedas tell it in a very cryptic way. And Purans give us the details. They elaborate. That's the nature of Purans. They elaborate on the stories that are just hinted at in the Vedas. So Vedas have very beautiful verses related to creation. One is the Nasadiya Sukta, there is the Hiranyagarbha Sukta, there is the Purush Sukta, and all of them in different ways deal with creation, how it happened. But all of them agree that in the beginning there was this one primal being. You can call him God, him or her, God, the supreme being, because God has no gender, God has no dualities, right? So the supreme being was present. And from that supreme being came this creation. So the Nasadiya Sukta actually tells us about, the supreme being the origin of all the 14 Lokas. They very clearly say that, from his eyes came, one eye came sun, one eye came moon, stuff like that, so that you very graphically, they basically tell you that everything that exists has come from that supreme being. He is this universe. And the Purans, then they build on that and then they elaborate and they give us the details. And they tell us that this primal Adi Purush is Vishnu. And the concept of Vishnu, then, because they say that, this entire universe is the Adi Purush. So, which means that we are all existing in that Adi Purush, which is Vishnu. So, Vishnu, if you go to the root of the word also, Vishnu means someone who's spread all over.
He's everywhere.
He's everywhere. So, Vishnu represents the concept of space. Similarly, Shiva, he's called Mahakal.
The great time.
The great time. So, Lord Shiv is basically the concept of time. So, the concepts, the scientific concepts are hidden in the Purans in the form of stories. That, the Adi Purush was there in the beginning, and, from him came Brahma, from his navel. Why would Brahma be born from the navel of the Lord, of Lord Vishnu? Why? He's the stalk of the lotus connects him through the umbilicus of Lord Vishnu. That is a representation of how a child is connected to the mother.
Right.
Through the umbilical cord.
Which is the moment of creation for
Which
that
is
child.
the moment of creation for a child, So that connection is shown through the stalk of the lotus. That, Lord Vishnu is the mother. He is the creator of Brahma. And then from Brahma comes, Brahma is this material world, the material realm. And from Brahma's forehead emerges Rudra, who's the destructive power of time, basically. And thereafter, the creation, further begins. So in the beginning itself, these parameters, these scientific principles have been laid down. There has to be space, there has to be time, there has to be energy, which is Shakti, and there has to be, which is the flux, which is there in the universe, which is gradually getting denser, molecules bouncing with each other and, combining to form heavier elements and turning into matter, which is Brahma. So Brahma, Vishnu, Shiv and Shakti, these explain these scientific principles of creation, of how creation happened, which is very similar to how Big Bang explains it. And beyond that, then, of course, there's a whole story of how, different species came to be and all that. And Brahma creates from his thoughts, Manas Putras, which are mind-born sons, basically. And these further take up the task of creation. And one of them, Daksh, he has, a lot of children who don't want to follow the path of getting entangled into the material world, and they go and start praying and meditating. So, but then he has some daughters, who are married to the Manas Putras, and then they start creation. And that's how the concept of Vasudhaiv Kutumbakam, which you say the world is one family, that also comes from the Purans. The whole idea that we are all related, we are all linked to each other, that is such a beautiful and such an important concept for today, for today's world, where humanity is literally
trying to wipe each other out.
Yeah, we were decimating species, off the face of this planet. And that is such an important concept to understand. Why are we linked? And again, beautifully, the Purans tell the stories of a Kashyap Rishi, and who has these 13 wives, and all these 13, they're sisters. So they're daughters of Daksh. And all of them give rise to different species. So Aditi is the mother of Adityas, who are the gods. Diti is the mother of Daityas. Danu is the mother of Danavs. Kadru is the mother of serpents. Ira is the mother of vegetation. Surabhi is the mother of cows, etc., etc. So, there's all these species that exist on this planet. They have come from Kashyap Rishi and his wives. So again, it tells us that, we've all evolved from a single being. And, that's how science also talks about evolution, that life evolved from a unicellular being. And then it further branched into, prokaryotes, eukaryotes, etc., etc. We did all that in biology. And then, the whole cycle of, again, we come back to the 84 lakh species and then we've evolved to humans.
Right.
So I would like to now ask you a little bit about a reel that I've been seeing on Instagram nowadays. It's about Vishnu ji, where they're saying that within a single breath of his, he's creating and destroying the universe.
Right.
So can you please explain that? Number one. Number two is that then what about Shiv ji? Because a lot of people link it to his Tandav also. Then where is he in this entire?
Right. So, of course, Shivji is time, right? So he has to be involved in everything. There's no question about it. They have very fixed responsibilities. And more than responsibilities, it's different forms of God that execute different functions. So, Vishnu ji, again, there is different forms of Lord Vishnu. A lot of us don't understand that, concept. Again, if we deep dive into the Vaishnav philosophy, we realize there's different forms of Vishnu. There's, just as we have different avatars of Lord Vishnu, Vishnu form itself has multiple forms. And similarly for Shiva, there's different forms of Lord Shiva as well.
Right.
So the one I mentioned, Rudra, earlier, that emerges from Brahma's forehead is one of the forms of Lord Shiva. But there's Lord Shiva who exists even before that as well, even before the creation of the universe. So when we're talking about Lord Vishnu's breath, we're talking about a form of Vishnu called Mahavishnu. So this Mahavishnu, every time he exhales, there's universes that pop out of his skin. And every time he inhales, the same universes go back into his body and they are destroyed. So the entire life of a universe is a single breath of Mahavishnu. That is the concept. That is the grand concept that, that is given in our scriptures. So it tells us that, we are infinitesimal.
It also tells us that they already, time is relative.
Yes.
It also actually tests the theory of relativity.
Most definitely.
And time dilation, because, one breath of his, could be a few seconds for him, but it's the lifespan of one entire universe.
Yes. And the lifespan of an entire universe is the life of one Brahma. So all the universes, and there's also the concept of multiverse here.
Right.
That there's millions of universes that come out of his body pose. So there's a multiverse. Every universe has a separate creator, Brahma. Every universe actually also has a Vishnu form to take care of that particular universe.
Right.
So this Vishnu that we spoke about, Mahavishnu, again, as I said, Vishnu is space.
Right.
So where are the universes emerging? In space.
Right.
Of course, where else would they emerge,
Absolutely.
right? So that is why it's a Vishnu form and not the form of Shiv. It is a Vishnu form. But time comes into picture when the universe is going back into his body pose. That is when Shiva comes into picture. That is the dance of Shiva.
Okay.
That is the end of time.
Okay.
And time, the concept of entropy.
Yeah.
That, with time, everything will go into a state of chaos from organization. So that is how the universe functions. These are physical laws that are denoted through these deities.
Okay, so there's a certain reference that most people make nowadays about the Ramayana and the multiverse. Is that once, I think, within a crack in the earth's crust, Sri Rama dropped his ring.
Yeah.
And he told Hanumanji to go looking for it. By the time he reached the bottom,
yeah,
he saw that there were many rings over there,
Yes.
and that's the Patal Lok, right?
Yeah.
So over there, the king of the serpents comes and explains to him that there are many universes and there are many Sri Rams,
Yeah.
and he has dropped it in each one.
Yeah.
First question: is this reference authentic? Number two, where does the Patal Lok now? Are they still really on Earth, or is this something else?
Right. A very good question, actually. I think the mistake that people tell while narrating the story is that there's multiple universes and all the rings are landing up in a single Patal Lok. That cannot happen.
Right.
Because as we talked about the 14 Lokas, the lower Lokas, one of them is Patal.
Yeah.
So there's Atal, Vital, Sutal, Talatal, Mahatal, and Patal, and Rasatal. So the Patal is one of the lower Lokas. In each universe, if we assume that there's a similar distribution, there will be different Patal Loks for each universe. So that actually does not tell us about multiverse theory. It tells us about repetition of events. And that brings us to the timeline. Again, sort of the relativity concept, where Brahma, whose life is the life of the universe, how does his life compare to our life? The concept of yugas comes into play. Do the same things repeat in every yuga?
It's another podcast on that.
Yeah. So that actually tells us that Ramayana has happened multiple times within our universe.
Okay.
We cannot say anything about other universes. The stories are not available to us. The Purans tell us stories of our universe, of how things happened in our universe in different days of Brahma. And now if we break down the life of Brahma further, the lifespan of the universe, as we said, is the life of Brahma, which is equated to 100 Brahma years, not our human years, 100 Brahma years.
What's one Brahma here?
So one Brahma year is 360 days and 360 nights. And we'll come down to the calculation. So 360 days and 360 nights. Night, there's nothing that exists because every night Shiva destroys everything. There's dissolution. And every morning, Brahma has to start creation all over again. So we consider only the daytime of Brahma when we're talking about creation and life and different forms, etc., and lokas. So each day of Brahma is called a kalpa. And each kalpa, like we have 12 hours in a day, each kalpa has 14 manvantars. The divisions are called manvantars. Just as each hour has 60 minutes, each manvantar has 71 mahayugs. Just as each minute has seconds, each mahayug has 4 yugas. And that is how the entire lifespan of Brahma is built. So the smallest duration is of Kali Yuga, which is 432,000 years.
That's the smallest.
That's the smallest.
Wow.
And the Dwapar is twice that, Treta is 3 times, and Satyuga is 4 times.
They are just multiples of each other.
Multiples of each other. And this duration is 1 Mahayug. So 1 Mahayug multiplied into 71 is 1 Manvantar. Into 14 is 1 day of Brahma. Into 360 is the 1 year of Brahma.
And that into 100 is...
into 100 is the lifespan of Brahma, which comes to about 311 trillion human years.
Wow.
So that's relativity for you.
So all of this is really invoking my curiosity to know further, which is why I will now ask you about the Rig Veda. You or somebody else, had forgot who exactly has mentioned before that the Rig Veda sort of invokes your curiosity.
Yes.
Can you explain that further, please?
So as I said, earlier, different scriptures cater to different intellects, right? So the Nasadya Sukta itself, which is about creation, and it is actually asking questions. The Purush Sukta is actually what tells us that, everything comes from Purush. Apologies, earlier I had mentioned Nasadya Sukta, but Nasadya Sukta is the one that is asking questions, which is basically about, they're trying to figure out what existed. So, and they're postulating that there was only darkness that existed. Probably there were deep waters, probably there was energy, probably there was this, probably there was that. And one primal being was there, but does that primal being know where everything has come from? And it ends with the question, or maybe, the one who's sitting in the highest heaven, maybe he only knows all this. And the last sentence is actually, maybe even he does not. That is the beautiful thought that, it would have considered sacrilegious, blasphemy in some other part of the world, that, you're questioning that God does not know. How can God not know? Right? But that is the question. That is the scientific curiosity that you get in the Rigvedic verses, which urge you or encourage you to ask questions, understand this universe, meditate, deep dive into your consciousness, connect with the universe, and figure out how these things have happened.
It's like sort of saying that, okay, God existed after creation, or after
Yeah.
things came into play, where
Yeah.
Mother Nature created God,
Yes.
or whether is it God that created,
Yes.
or Bhagwan that created
Yes.
Mother Nature.
Exactly.
So
So
it's-
those are the questions that are being asked in Rigved.
But what's the answer here?
So there's no answer. They leave it at that.
Okay.
The answers come in the Purans. Of course, Purans tell us what exactly happened, if you want to believe. But if you don't want to believe, you find your own path, you find your own journey.
Because most science fiction movies today also are based on similar questions.
Yes.
That where do we come from?
Right.
Why are we here? And where are we going?
Exactly. So
And
those
none
are
of them have
the...
been able to answer that.
Exactly. Because see, we can only postulate theories. That is why I find so many parallels between science, modern science, the theories that we have today, and what is already mentioned in our scriptures. They had a similar thought process. They were men of science. They were asking questions. They were analyzing whatever was available around them, and they were postulating theories that this could have happened, or maybe this could have happened. But even today, we do not know what has happened. Even scientifically, we do not know. Big Bang is also just a theory. Stephen Hawking was one of the biggest minds in science, especially related to universe and, the theories that rule this world. And he has also said, there's a very high probability of multiverse, that if a Big Bang actually happened, there's a very high probability that it turned into a multiverse rather than a single universe. But how can we test that? We
don't have the tech to do it.
We don't have the technology currently to test that. We have not even crossed our solar system. We have not explored our galaxy. And there's trillions of galaxies in this universe itself. How will we find the edge of universe? How will we ever cross it? It's not possible.
And yet you have your ancients who have described this in detail.
Yes.
Maybe the tech is to, your consciousness.
Yes.
Enhancing your consciousness,
Yes.
or opening that up to such a level that you can actually see
Yeah.
and unite with
And you
universal
can,
consciousness and
unravel
understand
the
this whole thing.
secrets of the universe.
Right. Also, so science fiction, there are many movies that today talk about, the origins of mankind on this planet, where they say that, okay, we are basically evolved, or, we've come to be from engineers. Like, there are higher level engineers who come, they terraform the planet and they plant civilization, or they plant, people, or, life over here. And then they also have the ability to destroy it at will. And that's why, humanity is, trying to search for a newer planet all the time. Like, you have the Elon Musks of the world who are saying that, we may be born here, but we're not meant to live here.
Yeah.
Interstellar talks about it. Prometheus, the entire Alien series talks about all this only. And most
Yeah.
of the science fiction movies are about contact, or, trying to establish contact with higher beings.
Yes.
So ancient scriptures also talk about a lot of this stuff, where you talked about 14 lokas. You talked about 3 lokas, basically, which are divided into 14 lokas. And I'm sure the scriptures also mention intergalactic travel at that time.
Of course.
Where, beings were traveling from, one
Yes.
loka to another.
Yes.
So can you just tell us a little bit about that?
Sure, there's so many stories. In fact, it's just crazy that when you start reading the scriptures, you find all these stories that take you directly into the realm of science fiction, and you suddenly realize that, boss, this is something which could turn into probably a very good movie. so all these movies, they have developed concepts,
Absolutely.
And here we have scriptures that were written thousands of years ago who already have these concepts. It's just unfortunate that we are not picking up these concepts and making movies on them, because we are not even aware. Nobody reads the scriptures, unfortunately. But all these concepts of interstellar travel, intergalactic travel between Lokas, and probably the use of wormholes. How could the gods suddenly appear somewhere, and then they disappear? Suddenly prakat hote hain and adrishya ho jate hain. So how does that happen? So probably, very similar to teleportation,
Right.
that Star Trek had.
Yeah.
These are concepts that are
Made
already
me up.
Beam me up. Exactly. So, these are the concepts that are already there in the scriptures. And interstellar travel through spacecrafts, which are called Vimanas, right? So the Vimans, Pushpak Viman, of course, is very popular, which was on this planet, right?
Right.
And again, we have to understand this very basic fact that this technology was not developed by humans. It is clearly mentioned as a technology developed by an advanced civilization, which could either be Devas or Asuras. Humans did not develop Vimanas.
They got it.
They got them as boons or as, a favor. So if you please a particular god, that's when, they would, and you ask for a specific thing like a Vimana, then they would give it to you. So humans did not have the capability. So maybe on Earth, the technology was not that advanced, but they're clearly telling us about alien civilizations that were much more advanced, that had this technology.
And they would visit
and they would visit, and they could share that technology with us. All over the world, you see signs of, again, a lot of people call it conspiracy theories and all that. I'm not getting into that. But I'm saying just look at the evidence. There are evidences that probably aliens did visit us at some time.
We're talking about archaeological finds.
Archaeological findings is, in the Native American culture, even before Native American, the original civilizations of the American continent. There's signs in Egypt.
Yeah.
So there's so much.
And very similar.
Very similar.
Like the paintings are very similar where
Yes.
they're pointing to, sort of
particular-
UFOs or something
Yes.
landing on.
So this is where I have a question about a certain temple, very popular temple in the south. It's called the Padmanabha Swami Temple.
Right.
And we visited it over there, and they said a lot of the priests told us that there is certain number of rooms below that.
The
where
chambers haven't been opened.
Exactly. Please tell us about that.
Because they say that there is the real wealth is the advanced tech, not the money and
Right.
the gold and all that inside
Right.
these vaults.
Yeah.
And a lot of these vaults are booby trapped, and
Yeah.
they're unable to be opened. And
Yeah.
I read some article where they said that this group of scientists or excavators went in and they opened up that first door, second door, third door. When they opened it, there was acid, and they all died and whatnot. These are again I don't know whether this is true or not, but there's so much of information or misinformation on it.
Yes.
But the fact is that they talk about the priests out there. When we met them, they said that the kind of tech that's there in these underground vaults of the Padmanabha Swami Temple, and in fact even the deity there is exactly what you said. It's Lord
Vishnu
Vishnu lying in
reclining.
space.
Yes.
He's reclined and he's lying there. From his navel comes out Brahmaji,
Yes.
and then from his hand he's just looking at the Damru. And it's all the three are there.
Yes.
Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva.
Yes.
And it basically denotes the whole illustration of creation.
Right. Right.
So, I don't know what the specialty of the temple is, but what I understood is that there's a lot of highly advanced tech that's available there, which humans should not get access to. So I don't know.
That's a possibility, but I personally am not really aware of what's in the walls or what could be there in the walls. But there's a possibility for sure, because there are a lot of other temples also that are considered marvels.
Right.
Of course, Egyptian pyramids are considered that it was impossible for humans to build. Similarly, in Maharashtra itself, we have the Kailash temple,
Right.
which is the biggest monolithic structure in the world.
Absolutely.
It has been it's a temple carved out of a mountain.
That to top to bottom.
Top to bottom. And the amount of stone that had to be taken away to create that temple, you don't see that stone anywhere. And the age of that temple is not that old, right? So how did humans by themselves carve such a creation, create a temple like that, with tons and tons of rocks coming out every day? What technology was it? So again, a lot of people presume that there could be some ancient, connections with aliens. And very interestingly, there's a sculpture there carved on a relief carved on one of the walls where there's this man flying. I think it depicts Ravan. Pushpak Viman and Jatayu. So, but this Pushpak Viman, I'm not sure whether it's Ravan or not. That was my interpretation. But there's a man leaping in the air, and on his back is something which looks like a jet propulsion.
Like a jetpack.
Jetpack. So the modern jetpacks that hang on your back, and because of the propulsion you go up in the sky. It's exactly similar. So a lot of people again have theories about that. But again, that's, we can't prove or disprove it either ways. But the fact that our stories do mention technology that allowed people to travel within Lokas, that's definitely established. And the descriptions of these Vimanas are also very, it brings to mind modern technology. Because, these Vimans run with a thundering sound. They release fire. They have serpents releasing fire. They run on the strength of 10,000 horses. So clearly it's a very powerful engine, which is making this sound and which is throwing the jet fuel probably behind, and that's how it moves. And they are prodigious in their capacity. They're huge. So the Pushpak Viman itself could carry Sri Ram, Lakshman, Sita, Vibhishan, his minions, the Vanars, entire Vanar Sena, they could carry back to Ayodhya. So
with all the equipment as well as with all the weapons, etc.
So imagine how huge it would be, So there is definitely mention. And as I said, it probably points towards an alien technology. It was not indigenous to Earth.
So I would like to take you back to the point where you were talking about the yugas. The Lokas. And over there, you're saying that based on your karma, you're just going up and down within the Lokas. But I believe that there is a way to completely get out of this, and whether you can choose whether or not you want to come back in this cycle. That is what we call moksha. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So that's going more into the metaphysical realm. And moksha is basically nirvana. It is the cessation of this cycle of samsara. And samsara cycle means birth, death, rebirth, death, reincarnation. This cycle we need to break. Otherwise, what ties us to this world is the law of karma. The only way to break this cycle is to consciously develop the akarma bhav. It's called the akarma, which Sri Krishna teaches to Arjun. When Arjun is ready to leave everything and take sannyas, Sri Krishna actually tells him that you're a fool. You think you're a very intellectual person, you're a very compassionate person, you don't want to kill your cousins, you don't want to kill your uncles and stuff, and you think you're a very nice human being, but you're not. You're actually relinquishing your duty. You are a kshatriya who's supposed to fight evil, and there's evil right in front of you.
Yeah.
And you are unwilling to kill or destroy that evil. So don't think of yourself as this body or the doer. You perform every action as an offering to me. That is the karma yoga. That is the simplest way
to attain moksha.
But there's other ways also. There's bhakti yoga, there's gyan yoga. So bhakti yoga is you leave everything on God. Like Mirabai, like Tulsidas, like Andal, in the south. There's this Sant Tukaram. There's so many saints. Gyaneshwar. So there's so many who actually follow that path of devotion completely. They dedicated themselves, to God. That is one path. Not everybody can do it. You have to be completely immersed in devotion to do that. There's the third path, which is Gyan Yoga, where you use intellectual, which is something that we are doing. We're trying to understand what this universe is. We're trying to understand how it functions. We're trying to understand the ways to get out of it. This is the intellectual way. This is the Gyan Yoga. You read scriptures, you find out ways. But the easiest or the most practical, I would say, is Karma Yoga, where, Krishna clearly says that, you do not have a right on the result. You only own the action.
Right.
Which is offered to me. You are doing it, you're performing it as a duty towards me. That is the only way you can get rid of the results that are invariably linked with every action. Every action has a reaction.
Yes.
That's the law of physics. So every karma that you perform will have a fruit. It is either a good karma or a bad karma. If it's a good karma, it is taking you, there's a positive in your ledger and there's a negative if it's a bad karma. And this balance sheet at the end of your life will decide, where you are headed. which loka you are headed to, or whether you are even headed to a loka. You're probably suffering in earth itself as a microorganism or something. So the only way you can break this cycle is by consciously devoting every act to God, consciously developing that sense that I am not the doer, I am only performing my duty.
So, which is why I will now ask you about, there's a fourth path also apparently, which is of meditation.
Right.
How is it any different from this?
See, meditation, as we discussed earlier, what is the next level of evolution? I personally believe that, meditation allows you to deep dive into the abilities of your, what we call the ESP, the sixth sense.
Yes.
What is it? It is basically a heightened intuition or a heightened sense of, your mental faculties. Now, a lot of people believe that there's nothing like intuition. It's just your brain processing all the inputs that you're getting at a much higher speed.
Right.
So consciously you don't get to know of it, but subconsciously your brain is processing all the inputs that are there in your environment, and your brain knows, it's telling you this, and we perceive it as a gut feeling. We do not understand that it's actually coming from our brain.
Right.
That could be true, but that also shows us that there's so much of our brain that we don't understand. A lot of people say that there's only 10% or 20% of our brain capabilities that we use. So meditation is a way to enhance that percentage, and that is how these people get the abilities of telekinesis, teleportation, probably, all these. And we know that these abilities exist. There are people, scientifically, there have been recorded incidents where people could actually do telekinesis. They could move things just by looking at them.
Yeah.
Right? Without even touching them. How did that happen? Probably our brain has this hidden, talent or, powers that we need to evolve further, which is where meditation helps. So our Upanishads tell us that you attain these siddhis when you go deeper into meditation, and there's proper rules to follow.
And it's still possible.
It is still possible. Yes, it is still possible. That's what our Upanishads tell us. So it's very beautiful. The scriptures are guiding you towards whatever goal you want. If you want to get out of this life, they tell you different ways, because one size cannot fit all.
Yeah.
Right? Depending on your mental faculties, your mental capabilities, you pick what path works for you. If you want to follow this path, then this is the process. If you want to follow this path, then this is the process. All that is given to us in the scriptures. Upanishads deep dive into meditation, yoga, and the steps that need to be taken. A lot of people believe that yoga is basically just performing the asana.
Yes.
Which is not true.
Absolutely.
It's called Ashtanga Yoga. There's 8 limbs to it. And there's yam, niyam, so which is the basic. Yam and niyam is the rules that you need to follow. There's certain things you need to do. There's certain things you cannot do.
But where do you find these rules?
They're all available in the Upanishads.
Okay, we'll talk a little bit about that. But just one last question on liberation, that is moksha.
Sure.
You leave this cycle and go where?
Okay, that's again a very pertinent question. So coming back to the creation question that we had earlier. So the Bhagavad Puran, the Vaishnav Tantras, they tell us that there's a spiritual realm.
Okay.
Where God exists.
That's non-physical for sure.
That's not physical. It's a spiritual realm.
Okay.
There's no physical elements in it. There's a spiritual realm where all the spirits or the souls live, and there's some sorts of people like a teenager growing up, having a rebellious nature. That no, I don't want to do this. Why should I follow this rule? I want to live my own life. I want to live in a different city.
My life, my rules.
My life, my rules. YOLO.
Yeah.
So I don't want to live here. Under your supervision, I want to have my own world.
Right.
And God, being an indulgent parent, he or she creates a separate world, separate realm for us, which is the material realm. So the souls who are living in spiritual realm, they're happy living there. The ones who are dissatisfied, for them, a material realm is created, where the Mahavishnu is there again to look after it.
Are there any mentions in the text as to how the people are living in that realm, the spiritual realm?
So there are some mentions for sure. The Purans also tell us that, most of the people who are living there, for example, if there's somebody living on the Vishnu Lok, the Vaikuntha planets, the Vaikuntha realms, so they have similar form to Vishnu. So, they associate with Vishnu. They're happy. all that these guys do is just, hang around, chill, sing, dance, and, they don't need to eat. They don't need, there's no physical
It's not a physical,
requirements. Yeah. So there's basically the finer things in life. That's what they're doing. That's what they're indulging in.
For the rest of eternity.
For the rest of eternity.
Okay. One question for the youth. There are way too many texts. We do not have one single book to describe
Yes.
our
Everything.
thing. So this has baffled me till now. I hope it doesn't baffle me anymore. Which is that, where am I supposed to start, and in what order do I read the texts like Vedas, Upanishads, Purans? Where do I start?
Again, a very pertinent question. It's not just you. I'm telling you, it's majority of Hindus who are not aware of, what is there, what exists. And that's why I started with that classification earlier.
Yes.
So there's this Vedas, which is called the Shruti, which is heard. This was heard by the rishis. These are visions that came to them in a trance state. And these are verses that became visible to them, and they just put it down. They have not written or they have not composed it.
Yeah.
Right. So there's this Vedas, which are more intellectual in nature. Then the Upanishads that discuss on the metaphysics and, how this world functions, the theory of karma, samsara, reincarnation, all this comes from the Upanishads, basically. The roots are there in the Vedas, but Upanishads build on it. The Upanishads tell us about the Atman, the soul. They tell us about the Brahman, the supreme being. That there was only one supreme being who existed. And then he or she desired. And that is how, from the desire, from the primal wish of Lord, this material realm emerged. Then there's the Purans that tell us the stories of kings, of gods, of rishis, of what happened, how creation happened, how the different dynasties evolved, Surya Vansh, Chandra Vansh, etc., etc. And then there is the other texts, there are ancillary texts, which is the Itihas. They are histories. They're called Itihas is history. This happened.
As it was.
As it was. So this is the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, and some people also include the Harivansh Puran in it.
Okay.
Which is again an ancillary text to Mahabharata, because Mahabharata talks about the Kaurav dynasty, the Kuru dynasty. The Kauravas and Pandavas are of the Kuru dynasty, and Harivansh talks about the Yadav dynasty, which is Krishna's dynasty.
Right.
So these three are considered historical. And there's Bhagavad Gita, of course, which is a summary of Upanishads, the metaphysics. So now the question that you ask, that you have to ask yourself first, what do you want to know? Do you want to know the intellectual concepts? Do you want to know the metaphysics? Like, how to get out of this world, moksha? Do you already understand the basics? Or do you want to know the stories?
If I want to know the metaphysics, that's in the
Upanishad.
Okay.
Yes.
And other texts still around the original ones, where do I find them?
Everything is available online now.
Okay.
It is so easy, fortunately for us and for your generation. I think you can access anything at the click of a button. There are websites that host all these scriptures. There is an IIT Kharagpur website, I think, which has a lot of scriptures. There's other websites, there's valmikiramayana.net, which has a beautiful translation of Ramayana available. Bhagavad Gita is available in 100 languages. I think all world languages have Bhagavad Gita translations. There's Gita Press Gorakhpur, which has the simplest translations in Indian languages. There's so much that is available.
The problem there is, Vineet ji, that there is a lot of misinformation also.
Yes.
Now, for example, if you just look at the Valmiki Ramayana, it has served as the basis for 300 distorted versions of the Ramayana.
Yes.
Now, people who pick up those distorted versions, they don't read the actual Ramayana. For example, the Lakshman Rekha is not there only in the original Valmiki Ramayana, but it has been, B.R. Chopra, etc.
accepted as a fact.
It's accepted as a fact today that there was a physical Lakshman Rekha. Now, the problem is that, okay, let's say if I want to know it all, is there a chronology or a sequence that I follow to read these texts, ancient texts?
Right.
And what are the right sources of those texts?
So, as I said, there are websites that have the authentic translations. See, always, for Ramayana, Valmiki Ramayana is the original.
Absolutely.
So, I wouldn't fuss too much about, which version of Valmiki Ramayana, as in, who's the author, who's the translator. Just pick up any version of Valmiki Ramayana. And again, there's a lot of scholars who've done work on it. So there's this Bhandarkar Oriental Research Institute in Pune. So they have brought out the critical versions of Ramayana and Mahabharata. So what they've done is that all these versions that are available floating around in the country, they've taken most of them. They've taken the northern recension, the southern recension, eastern, western, whatever recensions are available.
And they've come out with a nichode of that.
They have come out with the common points from those stories. That is termed the critical edition. That this definitely happened. Since all the different versions contain this is a common point. This definitely happened. And other stories may or may not have happened. Right? So that's a very easy way to pick up. Pick up the critical edition. It is available. There's authors like Vivek Debroy who worked on the critical versions. So there is a lot available today. I would say for a beginner, you should pick up the easiest or the smallest books. So I personally really like books that organizations like ISKCON bring out. They have very small, basic books, small books, thin books, easy read. That give you the basic philosophy of what are we talking about. What is life about? Life comes from life or life after death. There are books like that, that are available that tell you the basic principles of samsara, of reincarnation, of, karma. I would suggest, for a beginner, pick up those small books, easily available, probably online, or go to a ISKCON temple, in your city and get them easily. Then, and I'm not telling you to follow a particular organization. I'm just telling you these are very good introductions to the concepts that are there, the basics of Hinduism. Then you move to something which is of your interest. As in, if you want to read the stories, if you want to know the itihas, you pick up the Valmiki Ramayana and you pick up the Ved Vyas Mahabharata, or you pick up one of the Purans for stories, right? For metaphysics, you pick up the Bhagavad Gita first.
Okay.
Because that is the simplest version of Upanishads. It's a summary of Upanishads. It's said that, if all the Upanishads are like the cows, Bhagavad Gita is the milk, that comes out of it. And Arjun is the drinker, who's getting all this, and Krishna is the milkman. So Bhagavad Gita is a very beautiful, very simple book. If you understand, if you have to be in that space, mental space, to understand the concepts, metaphysics about soul, about the karma yoga, jnana yoga, moksha. Then you can read other Upanishads. Upanishads also have amazing conversations. Amazing conversations. There's this. So the Kane Upanishad is about Nachiketa, asking questions. There's Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, where Yajnavalkya and Gargi have a conversation. There's other, I think Chandogya Upanishad has the Shvetketu and his father's conversation. So there's conversations through which people are explaining these deep concepts. So, and then if you want to know your history, what were the Vedic people like? What was the extent? Vedas have a lot of historical information. They have a lot of cultural information. They have a lot of geographical information. They talk about Saraswati River. We don't have Saraswati existing today. A lot of people call it a mythical river. Correct. Everybody uses the word mythical. It is not mythical.
It's mystical.
It's not even mystical. It was a real river which dried up.
Right.
It was a physical river. And Rigved has so many mentions of Saraswati River. So you understand, what your past was by reading all these scriptures. So I would suggest the order should be like that. Pick up something simple and small that actually
to try and just get your feet wet, I think.
Yes. And you understand, you get the basics before you move to the other concepts. And then if you want stories, then I've told you, otherwise metaphysics or, all the historical data. Again, Purans also have a lot of historical data because they mention about different kings, different dynasties, etc. Vishnu Puran, but just keep in mind, all the Purans tell the stories about different kalpas of Brahma. Different kalpas of Brahma.
So there's one question I have. If the texts have any mention of this anywhere, it's about the Himalayas. A lot of people love underestimating the Himalayas. They just think that it's some snow-clad mountain or mountains that has some sort of weird beggar type people living without clothes over there, and they just have the power to live without clothes.
Yeah.
So I just want to know what else is mentioned in the text about it, because again, nowadays, since there's so much clickbait stuff happening, I've heard that there are some mysterious kingdoms in the Himalayas that are not visible.
Portals.
Yeah.
So please tell us about that.
So see, the scriptures do not give out everything.
Yeah.
They do not give out all the secrets. They hint at them. They of course tell you that, Kailash is where Lord Shiva lives, and Kailash mountain, a lot of people have this theory that it's a man-made structure.
Yeah.
It's perfectly pyramidal, etc., etc., and it's a no-fly zone and all that.
You can't even hike and trek there.
You can't hike
It's
and
bad.
trek there, exactly. So why? There's some mystery hidden around it, etc. But scriptures do tell us that there are places that are inaccessible, not just in Himalayas, even otherwise. They tell us about beings who are living, who cannot be seen. So there's this very beautiful conversation. So after Krishna leaves the planet, the Dwarka submerges.
Right.
So all the remaining people are transferred by Arjun to Mathura.
Yeah, he takes them all there.
He
right?
takes them all back. So Vajranabh, who's the grandson or great grandson of Krishna, so he's made the king in Mathura. And he is asking the question that, you brought me here and you made me the king, but I don't see any people living here. And then, one of the rishis tells him that there are people living here, you just don't see them. There are beings, very realized souls, because this was the land of Krishna, who have achieved their purpose, but they're still here, But if you feel uncomfortable, you settle new areas, you build new villages, build new cities, etc., etc. So the scriptures do tell us that there are, again, coming to Lokas, so there is, we don't see those Lokas, right? But they do exist according to our scriptures. So especially for the Himalayas, I would say, again, it is not really mentioned where that place is, but there's a belief in Buddhism, especially, that there's a place called Shambhala, which is in the Himalayas. And Shambhala is mentioned in our scriptures as the birthplace of Kalki, who's the future avatar. And Buddhist texts, especially the Tibetan Buddhist texts, they believe Shambhala to be there in Tibet. And, which is where, for us, Kalki would appear. For them, there's a different set of kings.
Yeah. I think his name is Maitreya Buddha.
So Maitreya Buddha is a different concept again. But there's different kings. Rudra Chakrin, I think that's in Sanskrit.
I think Maitreya Buddha is their new avatar who's going to be coming now.
Yeah, that's also there. But there's a different set of kings who are supposed to rule in Shambhala.
Right.
And when the time is right for the golden age to begin, that is when the last king of the dynasty will descend from Shambhala into the mortal realm. So that's what's given, not in our Purans, but it's mentioned in the Buddhist texts.
Right.
There's a spiritual guru who has written a book where he describes that he astrally traveled to Mount Kailash and he went into a cave which has extraterrestrial beings. They have nutritional cubes by which, you can consume them and, not eat or drink anything for 100 years. He's also talked about, the original spaceships through which the Saptarishis came. And he's talked about tech which is from different dimensions, different realms, different stuff. And now I'm beginning to believe that a lot of this could be true.
Well, you never know.
He's talked about it openly and he says, of course, I can't, prove it to you in a test tube, which is what science wants. But then you also have more and more scientists gravitating towards these theories.
Yes.
Towards our ancient texts. I've heard of NASA looking into our texts on the Pushpak Vimana and trying to see that what kind of propulsion
Germans
they were using.
did that. In the World War, Hitler did that.
Our medicine is much talked about by so many people all over the world. Ayurveda especially. So now I'm beginning to see the correlation between why our current scientists, when they are unable to find answers, they eventually turn towards our ancient texts and try and see that if these guys can even write this thousands of years ago, I'm sure they must have seen it.
Yes.
They could not have just imagined everything to such detail.
Yes. Exactly.
That's
Exactly.
where
Imagine just the lifetime of Brahma. Why is it 311 trillion years?
Yeah,
why
why not?
71 Mahayugs?
Yeah.
Why not a very easy factor like 10
Yeah.
or 20 or 30? Why such complicated? The very fact that these are not commonly used numbers gives us a clue that this is probably based on something real.
Right.
And I think that probably sums up our entire discussion again. That science and religion, they are both looking at answers. That's what both are trying to do, right? Science is also trying to find where we've come from, where we're going.
What's our purpose?
What is the origin? What is the purpose? And that is exactly what religion is doing. Both of them are just going about it in different ways,
right?
But the answer is the same. They'll both come to the same answers once they have evolved. And that is the beautiful syncretism, I would say, between our ancient scriptures and modern science. That our ancient scriptures talk about the same concepts that modern science is now developing or now beginning to understand. And both will probably reach the same destination.
I usually do an outro, but I think you've already done it for us because you've summed up the whole episode so well. And I think it was great just trying to understand and draw parallels between ancient texts versus modern science. And it feels weird and odd right now to know that, our modern science is so far way behind, what we have already discovered and written about and imagined and illustrated. And, just celestial weapons.
Yes.
The kind of weapons of mass destruction that we're talking about today have already existed in the past, based on elemental gods like, Varunastra, Rudrastra, the Agniastra, etc. It's just insane, the kind of tech or the access to tech that these guys had in the past. But it's been great, and I hope that we are going to meet again and shoot many more multi podcasts like Multiverse.
This is the first father-son duo that I've spoken to. Mostly what happens is one generation is interested in it, the other generation is not. And surprisingly, most of the times, I've interacted mostly with the younger lot.
I'm glad.
Yeah.
I'm glad that the younger lot is thinking of these things right now.
Exactly.
And trying to, not just blindly study what is being taught in school. They are looking out of their prescribed curriculum and they are looking at trying to find answers. And I think that, the more curious we become,
that is the purpose of life.
That is the purpose. I think that's what we need to, he's found his purpose, I think.
Yes.
So that's great. Like, he's a content child and he wants to learn more. And thanks to people like you, I hope more people his generation watch this podcast and, try to find odd facts and odd answers.
Yes.
Right?
Let's hope so.
Right. Thank you. And
thank you so much.
Thank you so much.